in tackling Blithe Spirit, you've done Coward before, you did design for a living, but what did you learn in doing Blithe Spirit for yourself about Coward?
Well, you have to do him on his own terms. You can't impose a modern sensibility onto him because it's comedy of manners, and the manners are very important. A lot of the laughter springs from Coward's obedience to the social mores of his day. I mean, he was infatuated with the upper middle classes, and a lot of his friends were drawn from that milieu. And he was interested in it. He liked the people, he liked the way they behave, he liked that world, and he writes out of that world. And there are a lot of the comedy, like when Charles first encounters the ghost of his first wife, the first thing he feels he must do is introduce the ghost formally to his second wife. And this is funny, and if you fortunately...
His second wife can't see or...
can't see or hear this ghost, but he says, Ruth, this is Elvira, Elvira, this is Ruth, and does it very correctly. Now, if we don't behave like that these days, but we remember. We've seen enough old movies to remember the way people used to behave.
When you read the play, I know it's a light comedy, but it was not written in light circumstances. It was written at a time in 1941 of great devastation. And in an interesting way, to put this play on now in America, it's our equivalent of some sort of devastation.
No, I agree with that entirely. I think that's why audiences love it. They love it because, A, it's light and entertaining and not concerned with exterior catastrophes, but also because it does hark back to a time when people were more secure about who they were.
Can I ask you to go on about that a little bit?
Well, simply that, I'm by no means an advocate of the old English class system, and I think England has possibly become a better place than it was when I first arrived from Australia in the 50s. But at least there was a kind of... everybody knew exactly who they were, and that's a sort of security in a country. The aspirations were limited to where you found yourselves, and that did have a certain security, whereas now in a democratic world it can become, since everybody's entitled to the good things of life, it can become a kind of Hobbesian nightmare where everybody feels they're entitled to a yacht and will fight like...
Well, that's the paradigm shift that we're now undergoing.
Exactly. They're not. They're not.
No.
Exactly.
Can we talk a little bit about your experience at the National, which I understand Lord Olivier had in mind for you to take over after he retired from the National. Do you have any... can you talk about working with Olivier a bit?
Well, I can. It was quite difficult because as a young man, aged 19, the old Vic came to Australia just after the war, and with Olivier and Vivian Leigh, and we saw Richard III, The Skin of Our Teeth, School for Scandal, and in brilliant productions. And immediately, about 30 young Australians who were stage-struck jumped on a boat and set off for England. So I was kind of marked by him like the grey-legged goose at a crucial stage in my upbringing. And I then had to deal with this man as a colleague, and he was a good deal older than I was. And it was not always easy to do that, particularly when I directed him in Long Day's Journey into Night. One had to sort of make an effort of will to establish a plane of equality. And he also believed in hierarchy. He didn't believe in class, but he did believe in hierarchy. He believed that everybody had their place in a theatrical company and there was a hierarchy in the theatre. But he was so brilliantly talented. I don't think he was the best actor of his generation, but he was the most amazing actor of his generation. I mean, he could do things with an audience on stage that left you absolutely
Any
speechless.
particularly high point for you?
Well, in the play that I directed him in, the last act of Long Day's Journey into Night, when he's describing the way the old actor sold out after having been led to believe by his idol, Booth, that he had an enormous future, and the way he threw it all away, that was absolutely thrilling, absolutely thrilling. And he had sort of vocal techniques and moments, I suppose, of rhetoric, really, when that sends chills down your spine.
You mean you've directed Woody Allen, you've directed Maggie Smith.
I haven't directed Woody. I've directed one of his plays.
One of his plays, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I know from my experience with another friend of mine, Maggie Smith defeated my late great friend, Carol Rice, who withdrew from a production because he couldn't contend with her. But was it difficult for you to deal with her in Lettuce and Lovage?
When I began as an actor, it was usually in comic roles, and I had modest success. I had sort of every year it was one step backwards, two step forwards, or whatever the saying is.
Yeah.
But I did have a success in a number of comic roles, mainly in Shakespeare, and I was confident of myself, of my comic instinct, and Maggie recognized that at once. It's sort of almost like a conspiracy, and therefore it's possible. As a director, I am shameless about demonstrating a moment. Not well, I don't do it well, but I will demonstrate it because it saves hours of talk.
Mm-hmm.
And if an actor is very good, they see what you mean. They see, I mean, this was like Rupert. I could say anything to Rupert. I could give him a line.
Can you give me a moment?
Well, just the comic potential missing from a particular line.
Right.
And it's not that you're saying, say it that way. You're saying, look, this is the element that's missing, and I can demonstrate it better to you by saying it. And if they're any good, and if they're certainly better than I am, they will gobble that up and they will take it.
Sure.
And I think directing is more about that. It's more about listening all the time to dud notes, to unrealized moments. Not so much having an overview of the play, though you need that. You need to think you understand the material. But when you're rehearsing, it's not musical in a literal sense, but it is musical in the sense that you say, that line, no, that's not realized. That's good, that's good, that's no good, that's no good. So that you try to contrive that every moment reads and every moment has a value. It's not, you don't always succeed, but
right.
That's what I think the job is about.
Right.
And that's why I think that directors who have acted, whether they've acted well or badly is not the point, do have an enormous advantage. A, they're not frightened of actors, and B, they understand the very exposed conditions under which actors have to work.
Right.
And they understand that, and they take it on board, and they're not fazed by a little moment of temperament or discomfort or something that seems to an outsider ridiculous, but which to the person who's doing it is very of great concern. I worked as an assistant with a film director, John Borman, who'd never worked with actors, and they irritated him. He came out of documentaries. Right. And he did his first film, Catch Us If You Can, from a Peter Nichols script, and I was hired to coach the Dave Clark Five, a pop group at the time, in the mysteries of acting, a task at which I didn't really succeed because they weren't actors. But we had a very good leading actress called Barbara Ferris.
Sure.
And John was rather impatient with all the actors and would get annoyed when they couldn't do it right. You know, he'd say, well, do it better, do it right. And then one day he was watching Barbara, and he came to me, he had a stutter, and he said, I've just realized actors can't see themselves. And it sounds an obvious thing to say, but it is a profound statement about acting. I mean, a writer writes his work, he's outside it, he can read it, he can distance improv, he can see what it's about. A painter, a sculptor. But actors, they can't see their work. And therefore, they are extraordinarily vulnerable. And a director really becomes their eyes.
Sure.
And what I have to do is establish enough trust
right.
with the actor that he wants me to be his eyes, and also to freely admit that I may well be wrong.
Is it fruitful to talk about times when that doesn't work? When an actor refuses, like we do in life, to see something that's under your nose? Yes, I mean,
and it's very disappointing. I worked with Tony Hopkins, an actor who I admired enormously.
In what?
In the Scottish play, which I dare not mention.
Yes.
For the usual superstitious reasons. But he at that time, as he writes about in his autobiography, was drinking very heavily, and he finally became AA. But he was a brilliant actor. I mean, he's one of the best British film actors I think that's ever been, and is given in about 3 films: Howard's End, and Silence of the Lambs, and that one about the academic. Really beautiful, and the one about the butler. Beautiful performances. But very talented actors somehow don't like their machinery to be interfered with. And also he had this problem, which I was not aware of, because he was a man of such robust physical energy. And I know I wasn't helpful to him. I know I confused him. I didn't establish a language with him. And it was, for both of us, it was a painful
I mean,
experience.
does each playwright, I mean, I understand what you mean by establishing a language for the actors, but do you find when you direct plays that each playwright has his own language or her own language and idiom that you have to sort of learn to communicate with the actors?
Yeah, I mean, my job, it seems to me, breaks down into 2 stages. The first stage isn't concerned with the actors at all. It's concerned solely with the script. And when I do a play with Michael Frayn, we go through it any number of times together. I get him to read it to me so I can think while he's reading. And I play dumb. I ask anything that comes into my head that is at all confusing, and I try as much as I can to get inside his head and know what he wanted, and know what his requirements are or what his expectations are. And in something like Copenhagen, he didn't have really any idea of how it should be physically staged, or to the extent it should have scenery. He sort of left all that to me. And that was a relief, because I felt I could then proceed, and we went through about 5 different ways of doing it and models before we came to the simpler, very simpler way we did it. Yeah. So that work happens first, certainly with a new play. But then once you stage it, once you're working on it with the actors, an entirely different process is at work, and it's a very pragmatic process. When you look at it and you try to say, that's working or it's not working, and if it's not working, how can we make it work?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what happens, say, when you're directing? I actually had this experience because I wrote a review that was done at the Manchester Royal Exchange of Woody Allen's short, called the short fiction from the magazine called The Bluebird of Unhappiness.
Oh, right.
And what happened? I know Woody, and Woody is far more controlling and almost capricious about his tastes of seeing his things done when other people are doing them. Did you have that experience when you were?
Oh yes, he was. When I first met him, he said, "I don't know why." I said to him, "Woody, why aren't you directing it? You're a brilliant director. Why not?" Oh, he said, "I wouldn't know where to begin. I wouldn't know where to begin." And so I thought, "Oh, thank God, he's not going to interfere." But in fact, he had views about everything, and it was quite difficult. I mean, I admire. There's nobody I admire more.
No, I know. Me too.
I mean, to make a career for yourself in complete charge of your movies over God knows how many years, and produce this body of work and to go on working.
Exactly.
Is amazing. It's an amazing achievement. And he was very helpful to me, because I had a film coming out at the same time when I was preparing these plays, Country Life, which was being released by Miramax. And he was very helpful to me, and he saw the film and he liked it, and he had a word to Harvey Weinstein about it, and was very generous about
Was
that.
there any, in terms of, because Woody seems to be so, he apparently wants to be so helpful, but can also be so entrenched.
Well, I have to say, he was totally impossible to work with.
But then how did you manage to negotiate it?
I managed to negotiate it because a friend of mine said, a lot of people said, "Don't touch this job with a barge pole. You're working with 3 very difficult people, all of whom will be solely concerned with their third of the evening, and you will have a nightmare of a time." And Maureen Lipman, who's a friend of mine, the English writer and actress, said, "You must keep a journal. Keep a journal. It'll keep you sane." And so I kept this journal. And when I ran into terrible trouble with Woody, when Woody said, well, he'd come and see a show and he'd say, well, it's awful, it's awful. It's awful. It's terrible. And, normally I would go home to my out-of-town hotel and burst into tears. This time I didn't. This time I went back, opened my book, and started to write.
Right.
And I kept it. I was very rigorous with myself. And I remember one Sunday on tour, I'd been too busy to write a word. And so I had to write up the whole week on a Sunday. And I was in my pajamas from 9 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night, writing up the week. And I did so honestly. And I didn't do it with any malice towards Woody, but I just reported the facts. And we went through various dramas, and of course Elaine May, the only person who behaved impeccably because he refused to attend was David Mamet. And he was wonderful, and he would ring up and say, well, how's it going? And I think, so it's pretty going. I said, David, please come. I need some help. I need an outside opinion to tell me whether I'm making a complete mess of this. And he said, look, my advice to you is go out and get a gun and shoot Woody and Elaine.